She was the rebellious beauty who defined the silent film era, yet in 1940, she vanished from Hollywood as if she'd stepped off the edge of the world. America once adored her trademark bob haircut and those dark, mournful eyes. But few imagined that behind the glamour lived a woman carrying secrets and scars she never dared reveal. More than 30 years later, a film historian accidentally uncovered where she had disappeared to, and what he found left him shaken to his core. Never before seen photos, brittle handwritten letters, and long-buried memories are finally coming to light in this video. Watch until the end to uncover the truths Hollywood spent decades trying to hide. She was born on November 14, 1906 in Cherryvale, Kansas, a quiet Midwestern town in the heart of America. Her father, Leonard, was a reserved lawyer who adored books so much he'd spend whole evenings buried in Greek philosophy. Her mother, Myra, a free-spirited pianist, believed music and art were the only escape from life's dull routine. Surrounded by this unusual mix of discipline and creativity, Louise grew into a bright, curious child. But her world held darkness too. At just 9 years old, she was molested by a neighbor named Mr. Flowers. It marked her forever. She never spoke of it, carrying the memory like a bruise no one else could see. Years later, she said she stopped believing in gentleness that day because even the kindest names could hide terrible truths. Her mother, despite her gentle songs, Debussy and Ravel, drifting through the house, was strong-willed and determined to raise an independent daughter. When Louise turned 10, Myra recognized her natural gift for dance and pushed her to pursue it, believing the stage might help her reclaim her confidence. At 11, Louise stepped onto the stage of the local opera house for the first time, eyes blazing with intensity, her movements smooth as silk. The audience fell silent. People later said she didn't just dance. She told stories with her body. Word spread quickly across the region. By 15, she left Kansas for New York City, the land of bright lights, huge dreams, and unforgiving challenges. She joined the Denishon Modern Dance Company, a groundbreaking force in American culture. Under Ted Shawn and Ruth St. Denis, Louise rose quickly, bold, talented, impossible to ignore. But tension followed. St. Denis disapproved of Louise's fierce independence and blunt honesty. She saw the Kansas newcomer as an arrogant upstart. The conflict finally erupted. During rehearsal in front of the entire company, St. Denis fired her without explanation. The room fell silent. Devastated but unbroken, Louise walked out. She didn't stop. She went to Broadway, performing in the George White Scandals shows known for launching careers. She danced with the desperation of someone who had already lost everything once, and audiences couldn't look away. By 1925, she was on stage in the legendary Ziegfeld Follies. The shy girl from Kansas was gone. Now she was confident, provocative, utterly modern. Hollywood noticed. Paramount producer Walter Wanger became mesmerized by her cool beauty and unreadable gaze. He offered her a studio contract and quietly began an affair with her, though he was married. Louise knew it was trouble, but love had always been complicated for her. In the end, Paramount signed her for 5 years. A new chapter had begun. But if she thought stardom would be easy, she was wrong. At 18, she caught the attention of Charlie Chaplin, the most powerful man in the industry. He was 36, married, and so famous he barely lived like a real person anymore. Louise, young and intense, rushed toward him like a moth to a flame. Their brief summer affair blurred passion, artistry, and danger. When he left, the wound stayed with her forever, a reminder of how brutally Hollywood could use its power. A few years later came the role that would define her image, a girl in every port. She didn't just play a flirtatious woman, she embodied rebellion. The razor-sharp black bob just skimming her jaw, the sly curve of her mouth, that cold glitter in her eyes. She wasn't acting. She was creating a cultural earthquake. Women across America ran to hair salons to copy her look. In 1926, she married director Eddie Sutherland, but to Louise, marriage felt like a golden cage. She hated the idea of being a good wife once the stage lights turned off. Within a year, she fell into an affair with millionaire George Marshall Handsome, generous, dangerously irresistible. Their relationship set Hollywood buzzing, and eventually she left Sutherland. He was so devastated he attempted suicide by taking sleeping pills. He survived, but Louise carried the guilt like a shadow. Then came 1928, the peak of her success and the beginning of her fall. During filming Beggars of Life, she saw Hollywood's cruelty firsthand. A vicious rumor claimed she had syphilis and had given it to producer Jack Pickford. It was false, but in an era obsessed with gossip, the lie spread like wildfire. Overnight, the rising star became an outcast. Director William Wellman made things worse, treating her as nothing more than a tool to capture realism. In one scene, he forced her onto a moving train, a misstep away from death. After that, she carried a permanent anger toward the industry she once adored. Crushed by scandal and loneliness, Louise threw herself into chaotic romances as if trying to outrun her own past. Her relationship with George Marshall continued, but the love had faded. All that remained was destruction. Then she met Pepe Lederer, niece of actress Marion Davies, who was involved with newspaper tycoon William Randolph Hearst. Pepe was wild, brave, and impulsive, just like Louise. They fell into a forbidden romance, dangerous in an era when same-sex love was condemned. When Hearst learned of it, he used his enormous influence to bury the truth. Pepe was forced into a psychiatric hospital under the pretense of treating addiction. Days later, she jumped from a window. Louise received the news in a daze, as if part of her soul had fallen with Pepe. That grief marked her forever. By 1929, when Paramount refused to increase her pay, Louise simply smirked and walked away. She left the U.S. for Europe, a place where art mattered and emotions weren't treated like weaknesses. Ironically, it was George Marshall, the man who'd once dragged her into chaos, who encouraged her to go. Many called her foolish for abandoning Hollywood when her star was still rising. Louise didn't care. She wanted freedom, even if it cost her everything. Decades later, when Hollywood romanticized its golden age, people began to realize it was Louise who helped shape it. When she arrived in Berlin in 1929, a new story began. In streets glowing with lamplight and filled with jazz drifting from smoky bars, she was no longer judged for attitude or looks. For the first time, she was respected as an artist. There she met director G.W. Pabst, the man who would make her immortal. Pandora's Box was born at the height of German silent cinema. Pabst didn't just see a pretty face. He saw a raw, complex, fragile spirit. He cast her as Lulu, the free-spirited siren destroyed by desire. It wasn't just a role, it was a mirror held to her own life. She acted with her eyes, her gestures, her silence. It was pure emotional language, something Hollywood had never seen. Audiences of the time didn't fully understand her cold, naturalistic style, but history did. Louise Brooks looked alive on screen. Afterward, Pabst cast her in Diary of a Lost Girl. This time, the character's suffering cut even deeper. To portray a young woman crushed by society, Louise had to confront the trauma she'd buried since childhood. When she cried on camera, those tears didn't belong to the character. They belonged to Louise herself. He once said, "She doesn't act, she lives," and he meant it. Those two films cemented her place in cinema history, yet her European success came with its own weariness. When he urged her to stay in Germany and continue working with him, it wasn't flattery. He knew her strengths better than anyone. She had extraordinary talent, but almost no discipline, and he warned her directly, "If you return to Hollywood, they will break you." She only smiled, the confident smile of someone convinced she could steer her own fate. She had no idea that this choice would mark the beginning of her fall. Back in America, everything had changed. Talkies were taking over, and the studio expected her to record dialogue for the Canary murder case. She refused, insisting she was an actress, not a servant to new technology. That defiance landed her on an unofficial blacklist. Overnight, the international sensation became an outsider. She didn't show regret, her pride simply slammed every door shut. As her career collapsed, so did her long, complicated love with the director she had once adored. She cared for him deeply, but freedom meant more to her than any promise. He proposed repeatedly, and every time she said no. When he finally married someone else, she sat alone in a small room, smoking, scribbling lines in her journal, smirking at the news as if it barely touched her. Years later, she admitted, "I could never belong to anyone. Maybe that's why I was lonely all my life." Another opportunity appeared when a studio offered her $500 a week, a dream salary at the time, but she refused to audition for a Western. The offer disappeared, and the few small films that followed only pushed her career further downhill. By 1932, she was no longer a star. She was an unemployed former icon performing in nightclubs just to survive. Under the stage lights, audiences still recognized those unmistakable eyes that had once enchanted the world, but now they reflected nothing back. In 1938, she returned to the screen in a low-budget adventure film with a young actor who would later become a household name. She grew out her famous bob and tried to start fresh. Hollywood didn't care. The film failed, and this time she walked away for good. The 1940s crept by quietly. She drifted between Wichita and New York, with no steady work, no close circle, and no clear direction. Back home, people viewed her with a mix of sympathy and judgment, a fading emblem of a bygone era. Yet in those same years when the world had all but erased her, she transformed into a symbol of rebellion. She wrote memoirs that chronicled her wild past, her missteps, and the passions that burned through her life. Readers didn't see a washed-up actress. They saw a woman who insisted on living by her own rules, even when the price was solitude. From Berlin's glowing cabarets to New York's quiet sidewalks, from the dazzle of movie sets to the dim corners of downtown bars, she left behind something time could never dim. She became the image of a woman who dared to love fiercely, dared to live freely, and dared to fall apart, simply to remain true to herself.